This is the Mindset Game podcast, and I'm your host, James Roberts. And on today's show, I've got Brett Bartholomew. Brett is a strength and conditioning coach, author, consultant, and founder of the performance coaching and consulting company, Bartholomew Strength. He's also author of Conscious Coaching, The Art and Science of Building Buy-in. So welcome to the show, Brett.
Yeah, thanks for having me, James.
So before we delve into today's episode, Brett, can you talk us through obviously your early beginnings in fitness and kind of get into where you are to today?
Yeah, I mean, fitness isn't particularly my realm. It's more sports performance, right? But like you look at those two, there's obviously some congruent characteristics. So I actually have spent the vast majority of my career training athletes. Of course, there's been some Gen Pop mixed in, and especially early days when I was a teenager, did some personal training and what have you. Went and got my undergraduate degree at Kansas State, got a master's degree at Southern Illinois University, where I researched and wrote research on motor learning, specifically how attentional focus or cueing impacts performance. The short story would be I've worked both in the team and private sector working with athletes ranging from military, NFL, NBA, youth, high school, collegiate, kind of that whole spectrum. Now, I still do a wide range of work, but mainly consolidated the past, I would say 4.5, 5 years specifically into pro sport. And that's the piece there. I mean, I grew up playing sports, baseball, football, boxing, started training fighters in exchange for my training when I was a college athlete. And those would probably be the hallmark points. Now I'm working on a venture called The Bridge Human Performance, which is a really exciting venture. I'm able to collaborate with both team and private sector strength and conditioning coaches to create a resource that is really kind of an entrepreneurial venture, as well as one that's focused on craftsmanship, coach development, X's and O's, but it allows coaches to kind of streamline different options for their career. So you might have coaches that, their day-to-day is coaching large groups in the team setting, but they also want to branch out and do a little bit more speaking or consulting. So we offer guidance with that. We also do some online coaching as well, but all of us involved with the company are actual coaches, and we're just able to collaborate on some really cool projects. So that's going to be the next 6 to 18 months, really getting that going.
And if we kind of come back to obviously your research at university and looking at QA, have you seen, obviously working from in that performance field, do you see that if we look at it from sport to sport and look at maybe say individual versus team sport, are some individuals better suited in that type of sport environment?
Some individuals better suited as individual sport athletes as opposed to team sport athletes?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that comes from a combination of nurture and nature, right? So depending on what your upbringing is, what those proclivities are, personality types probably play a role to a degree, but I'm no psychologist, so it would be dangerous for me to assume I have the answer there. But yeah, I mean, I think you see that in where people gravitate. Do they gravitate towards a sport like diving or, American football or proper football and soccer? So I think those things kind of handle themselves over time. If they don't enjoy team sport, they're going to whittle that away and find something that's a little bit more, I don't want to say isolated, but individually focused for sure.
And if we talk about more delving into like cueing itself, what are the precursors that you want to do as an individual to probably improve those?
In terms of proving, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. You cut out a little bit there.
In terms of improving your cueing, what are some of the techniques you could actually employ to improve those?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I talk about these in my book, Conscious Coaching. I always use a 3R framework. So it just goes into research, relate, and reframe. And the book goes much more in depth, but research goes into making sure to ask questions of the people that you're coaching and not just, hey, what got you into the sport? Why do you like this sport? Meaning, ask them who their favorite coach was and why, right? That will give you insight as to how they like to be communicated with. What athletes or other individuals they look up to and why. Ask them about where they're from, their background, family, siblings, all these pieces, what they like about their position. being able to get really in-depth information as to what drives them, it gives you a lot of really great frames to go off of. After that, you have to volunteer information about yourself, because guys aren't going to continue to tell you information, if you just sit there haphazardly and expect them to give you kind of the playbook to their personality, right? Like that would just be weird. You sit there and ask somebody questions, they feel like they're going to get interrogated. And then the final thing is being able to have that art of what I call talking in color, and we reference that in the book as well. How do I take what I've learned about you and what I want, you to be able to achieve either through our training or this process together, and how do we make them mesh together? How do I help you see what I'm trying to do and how that impacts you and is aligned with your goals? So I think that's a really easy framework. Yeah, you can't do the usual coach thing where you just kind of sit there and try to talk shop or be their friend. Like, you've got to draw that line, and at the same time you've got to learn the art of asking really good questions.
Well, Brett, wouldn't it come down to a little bit of that psychological essence of reflective practice in a way?
Reflective practice in what regard specifically?
As in looking at getting the athlete to consciously, maybe not say look outside the box, but being able to reflect on what they do well, what they don't do well, and doing it from that perspective.
Sure. I mean, that all goes into the research piece of that, right? Is asking them questions about all those things. You can ask them any number of questions, but the key is that you're thinking through thoughtful, open-ended questions to get them to answer. And you're not letting them just say, yeah, no, or I just like the game, or I'm competitive. It's the art of conversation. I make that point in the book. The art of coaching is about the science of connecting. And we also talk about 3 stages of internal identification and how you can use that as a coach or with your athletes to be able to help them better reflect and get deeper in understanding, all right, who am I? How can I leverage who I am? How can I better understand and direct the things that matter to me and what I feel like I do best in order to amplify my practices?
But isn't it a bit dangerous at times to use open-ended questions, because you can sometimes skew somebody's thought process?
I think anything in the world that you do has a double-edged sword, right? So I don't think I always suggest the alternative. If you didn't ask open-ended questions, what benefit would you derive of closed questions, right? You're certainly not going to get much from yes and no. I don't think that open-ended questions have to be leading answers. For example, if I say, who was your favorite coach, or who had the most impact on you as a athlete and why, there's nothing there that's going to skew them into something I want to hear. That's a completely reflective, open question, right? If you say, hey, don't you think it's true that when it's cloudy weather outside that everybody seems to be a bit more mopey? That's a leading question, because you're suggesting something, right? So I think it just goes into really investigating the types of questions that you ask. That's a good point on your regard. It's a good thing to be aware of.
But then that's probably my background with psychology and talking to psychologists. You can, in certain ways, like as you described, you can lead people to answer how you want, a study to be interpreted just by the question you ask them.
Yeah. I mean, I just think that goes on your ethics as a professional, right? If you're leading them, and you want them to answer certain questions that reflect a bias, then you need to ask yourself, are you really in this field for the right reasons, right? Like, I've never had an interaction with an athlete where I've really been like, man, I really want him to answer this way. That doesn't do anything for me. Otherwise, I just coach that guy the same way, right? So hopefully, you have coaches that really want to learn about their athletes and aren't faking it, or aren't just trying to create a bunch of cult-like followers. But I think if that's the case, the athlete will catch whiff of that pretty soon and probably not train with you long term.
But if we look at it from the other way, Brett, and I think maybe in this day and age it does come up a little bit more, do you think athletes, general population, do want to answer a question that, they have their assumption it's what you want to hear?
Oh yeah, I mean that's going to be anybody, right? But you just keep digging in the process, right? Like, you got to keep asking that, and then that's the relationship over time. You'll be able to see, do their actions align with what they're saying, right? That's why you never take anything at face value. You have to sit there and interact with your athletes over time and say, look at your behaviors, look at your goals, do your behaviors match your goals? And is what you're telling me really the case? And that goes into being a truly observant coach.
And if we kind of delve a little bit further and say, and we look at the terms of the how the book came about, what was kind of the instrumental, how would I put it, where you were at the time that you wanted to obviously write the book?
Yeah, I mean, there were a number of factors. One, I talk about really in depth in chapter 2, my own personal background and seeing the truly detrimental, almost traumatic effects that being around people that, just because they're well credentialed or because they have a certain area of domain expertise, they think that they're really good at their job, when in reality, they may not be socially and emotionally effective. Intelligence to me is not hallmarked by rote memorization of facts. It's hallmarked by the ability to adapt and be fluid across many different social situations, and then being effective in those situations, whatever that outcome may be defined by. So I had a lot of those instances when I was younger. I'm going to avoid going on in depth because the book, there's about 25 pages on that in particular, right? And I don't want to put your listeners to sleep. The other piece is working as a coach now for 11 years. I've seen, now, I mean, we've lived in the information age for how long now, right? We have more and more resources. Have those resources really led to us being better and more highly skilled practitioners? I would argue not. I think that in some ways, sure, like you have some things that you've been able to add because of the open access source of information, but information alone doesn't make a skilled practitioner. That's why we still have obese doctors. We have psychiatrists that are probably a little bit loony. We have divorced marriage counselors, and that's not an attack on any of those folks. That's just stating the obvious. You can be well informed, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you're upholding your end of that spectrum, right? So I think that just seeing things where people were ignoring this psychosocial piece, the communication piece, and just understanding that people aren't Toyota Camrys. No matter what information, what things that you have at your fingertips, you're going to have to be able to communicate with them effectively if you want to have positive outcomes.
But doesn't that come back to quote, do as I say and not as I do in certain circumstances?
And in terms of, like, you think that that's a good way for people to operate?
I would say that there's probably a pro and con of it. Obviously, the con of it is that, as you've said, you've got obese doctors, and obviously you could probably question that as from a fitness and health perspective. Is like, well, how can you say to me I need to lose weight, but you're not doing it? But then obviously the pro side of it is probably coming back to that trust element there, and you could say in authority within their field.
So you think that trust should come from titles and credentials and not exemplifying a certain kind of behavior?
I would say I would probably, at times, you probably need to be on the fence to a certain extent, because yes, the trust element is important, but as you described it in this episode, you've got to also question that person's ability to adapt. And obviously, well, if you take it from a coaching perspective, a teaching perspective, you've got to be able to adapt and be able to be on that level with that person, be it you're speaking to a teenager, an adult, or a child. You can't use the same language.
Right. And I don't think an arbitrary title, lends somebody to be an effective leader. I think titles are illusory. People can make titles up. So I don't think that that's on the fence. I don't think doing as I say, not as I do is always a great thing. I think it happens inherently. Like, nobody's perfect, for sure. But if we had to describe somebody that is a coach that you really wanted to follow into dire situations, you'd want them to believe that they're a man or woman of their word and that they've exemplified that kind of behavior in some degree. Of course, that doesn't mean that a coach of a power lifter needs to be able to squat 1,000 pounds until they go into the grave, because there's going to be certain limiting factors. But they should probably lift weights to some degree, as long as they're medically able to continue to do so. Otherwise, you have just a world of more and more charlatans, which I think is our primary problem right now. I think social media has allowed for people to open up the floodgates and act as if they're authorities on topics and swim in those waters that they maybe can't even touch the shallow end of. So it gets dangerous, right? We're helping people here, and it should be more than this promotion and this self-important kind of agenda that folks have. You just got to put stuff out there that has value. I think that's more important than anything else.
But Brett, obviously you touched upon it there. Doesn't it come back to the individual themselves to take onus on, probably as you've said early doors, is to reflect, look for those red flags, and kind of, if something it doesn't look right, doesn't sound right, should you not trust your gut and see those red flags for what they are, as opposed to with social media, obviously it's very much visual, and not trust the person, as you say, for face value.
Yeah, I don't think anybody should trust anybody at face value. I think that's there's a very unique quote, and apologies for the language, but it's as it was told to me, and it's in the book. It's always had a tremendous impact on me. Excuse me. Is excellence is self-evident, and so is bullshit. So something may look great, smell great, feel great, but you'll know if you're around it to a large degree. If that's the case, I mean, think what a tremendous opportunity you have, right? With the podcast that you've created, you get to interact with people from all over the globe. And I would argue, and please correct me if I'm wrong, probably within the first 10 to 20 minutes, you can tell if that person is as advertised, right? Like a lot of times we have people are the larger than life personas on social media. And then, you meet them in person and it's like they clam up because they don't have some script in front of them, or because, they're not surrounded by their kind of posse of supporters, or they're not in their comfort zone. And it's kind of like, okay, well, different domains are definitely going to have a different impact on folks, but you should be some semblance of just integrity as being who you say you are. And I think that's something we've got to keep top of mind.
I think could probably go a little bit further than that in terms of, like you say, if they're not surrounded by familiar faces, it could be, well, you could say it's confidence, and they're not used to socializing, interacting with somebody that they don't know. But then, as you say, it could be if you did take them outside their comfort zone, and like you say, they're talking BS, you can quickly find out that's the case by questioning them, or you can kind of, probably where it comes up big and evident is if they're very much contrary to what they say on social media. You say, well, obviously you don't, if you're saying that to me, and at the time of recording it's very much personal, it's probably going to go out to an audience at times, and you saying the complete opposite at times to your what would be the word, niche, and so on. Well, it's kind of two-faced.
Yeah, no question. And you make a great point for sure. Like, I'm not insinuating that somebody's a little reticent or shy on camera is a false or fraud. I'm talking about the content of their message, right? Like the delivery. Of course, we can all be nervous in certain circumstances and what have you, but your core identity in what you say, or your themes of what you're saying, should still get across. You'll actually find that people will be pretty forgiving more often than not if they see somebody that's blushing or shy and nervous and doesn't speak correctly at the time, because you can tell through other forms of body language or their level of engagement in that interaction if they're really trying, right? Like, it's just the moment's got the best of them a little bit, or if they're sitting there kind of darting their eyes around being like, yeah, I don't know, squats are good, I think, so I think that you can never take anything completely at face value. That's what makes studying people so fascinating. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, definitely. Well, I think it's. I was talking just about this yesterday with my family, and my mum was saying I was doing that even as a child. You're thinking, I don't remember like analyzing people and pushing buttons. You're thinking, I don't remember doing it, but going to the extent. I don't know how young I was, but as a child, pushing the right buttons, but knowing when to stop, when it's gonna, obviously you're gonna get you in big trouble. So you're thinking, well, if my family's saying that to me, I don't know, I'd have probably been preteen or something like that. I'd have thought. I've been doing it almost 20 years, that kind of nature of analyzing people. And obviously, well, it's not a good thing pushing people's buttons, but
I just say, what draws you to that? What do you like about pushing people's buttons?
I think from a sporting context, you can get under people's skin, and obviously probably from that context, you're doing it to not undermine them, but kind of get them away from the game. But from, I don't know, from a personal thing, it's not. I wouldn't say it's probably not a good thing because you're trying to annoy somebody, which is not great.
Yeah, or sometimes people, when they do that, when you find folks that like pushing other people's buttons, it's very insecurity driven where they're trying to, they want to they can hang with that person or throw them off their game and establish some level of superiority. And of course, like that's very different than the sporting context. You look at Mayweather, McGregor, right? That's a whole promotional thing, right? Like we know that those guys behind closed doors are like, okay, we just fooled the world, way to go. Like you go your way, I'll go my way. But it is interesting because you see that a lot in coaching. You see people trying to like poke one another, do this, do that. And I think as a younger strength coach, sometimes I'd fire back. I never got involved in it, but now I've just learned, it's kind of like Jay-Z. If somebody says something to Jay-Z, I don't think he's going to spend too much time responding. And neither does Eminem. Everybody, everybody likes to fight for their piece of the pie. But there are more than enough athletes and people for us all to work with and train that I don't run other people's races, right? Like you stay blinders on, focus on what you have to focus on, and let other people's issues be their issues.
I think, Brett, in terms of that, I think it's like we've attested to, social media has probably hyped that up a little bit in terms of people are, I wouldn't generalize and say it's more potent now than it was, say, 10, 20 years ago. With people,
it's more visible.
They're more concerned with what others think, whereas I think it's probably a big one within the fitness industry. You could probably say because people don't like to be bad-mouthed and kind of dragged through the dirt, but it's not a bad thing if you use like your quote with the research. You want that peer review at times because on the plus side, if you get commended by your peers, that's a good thing. So you should be able to take it on the flip side. If they don't agree with something you've said, to some degree, the negative aspect of things.
Yeah, no question. No question. Yeah, that's a good point.
But in terms of probably that, it's a difficult one because, like you were saying, we shouldn't be concerned with what other people think. But I think it's become a societal problem. Probably, I say the media probably hypes it up a little bit sometimes with the likes of, term unquote, celebrity. They've become famous for no apparent reason, or the big one, I think it's probably the dangerous one, was the celebrity backing, say, fitness or health things, and they've got no expertise whatsoever.
Yeah, happens a lot. That's for sure. That is for sure.
But what is your take on that, and what should people probably take face value? I'm very much, if I see that, I'll delve into this, be it article, news piece, and say, well, okay, they've backed this. What are the pluses of it? Obviously, the name helps the brand, but what are people actually getting from it? Because I think, what was it, when I was reading about a couple of weeks ago, I can't think of what the actress was, but she was backing and this was in a company that's got gyms in New York City and in the Hamptons. So obviously, it's lots of money is involved. I think it was, I don't know, $800 a month to just be a member. So obviously, it's out of the realm of most individuals anyway. So it is probably a bit ludicrous, but saying, well, what can you get? There's probably, like we didn't discuss, is if you're paying more for something, is not necessarily going to be better than, say, something that you're paying, I don't know, if we say 10% of that and say $80, it's not always better.
Yeah, I want to make sure I understand the question. Are you saying what can we take away from people that are kind of phonies or frauds, or what's the hallmark question there?
I could take it from that one, and then I'll probably rephrase it a different way.
Yeah, I mean, I think just part of being I think part of being a thoughtful, reflective, and holistic minded individual just comes from always looking at things in a balanced perspective. I think, I don't know many intelligent absolutists, or at least ones that, again, it depends. I guess it depends on your definition of intelligence. Um, but I think that you have to look at something. I mean, a popular example is Jillian Michaels, and granted, fitness is not my domain, but I can see just from being observant how that affects other things. And people will say, "Oh, she did this, she did that," and of course, like, and not even being completely familiar with their work, but what I saw, like, it's just a bastardization of certain principles, right, and characterization of a lot of things that aren't true. But she obviously knew how to put herself out there, and it worked. And so, do I think other people should follow suit in that? No, not in the way that she did it. I think you have to do your due diligence, but I would argue that she probably had a pretty strategic business mind, and some people could benefit from enhancing their business mind for sure. I mean, my father's a financial advisor, and I knew I didn't want to go into that, but I knew that there were principles that I could take from that to better support my family. So the money we do make is more carefully invested. So I think there's always somebody you can learn from. I mean, some of the worst, most atrocious, horrific leaders in history, what they did and who they did it to and how they did it, you can even take learning events from. And that just comes, from doing proper investigation and understanding what you're looking at. But I don't think that should be looked at as a quick and easy route for people to do those kinds of things. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with promotion. I used to think there was, but if you're putting value out there, then put it out there. I mean, researchers do it, right? Like, how many articles do we have on our desk? I'm holding up right here. That's a form of promotion. Somebody puts something in a journal article. Oh, here's another one. That's a form of promotion. They want their name at the front of the article because they want to be perceived as a subject matter expert, right? And there's nothing wrong with that because they're putting information out there for somebody. Now, if you're putting something out there that's going to hurt somebody or detract from their lives or do something negative and doesn't add value in any other place than your pocketbook, then I think you need to think twice.
But Brett, why did you think in the past that promotional or promoting oneself was a bad thing?
That's a great question. It was specific to my domain. Coming up in collegiate strength and conditioning here in the United States, specifically in football, you are just taught that being a strength coach means you're behind the scenes. You should not be heard from. Your job is just to coach your athletes and then kind of fade quietly into the background. Which there's great pieces about that, right? It's not about you. It's not about any of us. But at the same time, it's just like any other career. As you want to expand the opportunities available to yourself and your family, you're going to have to do some things that put yourself out there a little bit more. I mean, who would get a head coaching job in sport, or who would get any kind of job promotion if to some degree their work wasn't evident? So I think in the past we used to live in a world where if you just did a good job and had a fairly robust network, that you were bound to get some promotions and have some good opportunities you come your way. I think in the loud world that we live in today, with media and this and that, and everybody's connected and there's networks everywhere, I don't think it's always that easy. I don't think it's as simple as somewhere one of the best coaches, trainers, therapists, whatever domain you want is sitting quietly, and nobody even knows about him or her. And that doesn't necessarily mean that just because they're doing good work, they're going to get the job that they want or some great opportunities. I think now is the best time in the world to branch out, put yourself out there a little bit, because you can help more people if you leverage networks the right way. But where I was brought up in collegiate football, that was very, 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 it was just shunned against. If you were on the internet in any capacity whatsoever, you were somebody that wasn't doing your job.
But if we kind of use the American football as the example, could you not say, to some extent, the strength and conditioning coaches are possibly more influential than the head coach, so to speak, and that coach is, you're saying, they can't put themselves in the media limelight, so to speak, but they're on national television.
Yeah, I mean, to piggyback on that, I mean, because you said, but couldn't you say? I would say it's also could you say, right? Like, because you're not contrasting my point. It sounds like you're agreeing with it, that coaches, strength coaches do have a huge influence, and you're spot on. I mean, we're around the athletes far more than their sport coaches, right? But it's been this kind of coal miner culture where, strength coaches have struggled for so long to find a way to prove their value that they've done it in a sense of who's worked the longest hours, who's coaching the most, who's doing that, because that's their badge of honor. Because I could be the head strength and conditioning coach for an elite team, and that may or may not transfer into wins and losses. And we see that, right? There are great, great teams that are achieving massive success despite maybe having a very poor strength and conditioning coach at the helm. And then there's also teams that are not winning as much that have tremendous strength coaches because, just getting somebody stronger, faster, more resilient, that's not necessarily going to transfer into a team sport the same way it would track and field, right? Because the variables are far different. You need to have a great strategy from your sport coaching standpoint. You need to have people around you that understand how to play their position, do it well, and do their job. There's so many variables in terms of the folks on the other side of the ball. And so I think that's where strength coaches have struggled, is it's like, oh God, how do I show value? How do I, show people that I'm the best? Oh, okay, I'll just act like I work more than anybody else, which is funny, right, James? Because how many times you get on Twitter or social media and see dentists being like, yeah, come to our place. We did 15 more root canals than the guy next to us. Or I'm here all day. I'm a lawyer. I'm here all day, every day. I do more cases than anybody else. It's like, well, not really worried about if you do more cases. I'm worried about if you win more cases. And I know I wouldn't want a dentist that works like 18 hours a day because you have a drill next to my gum line, and I would hope that you're somewhat fresh and ready to go. But in our field, it's about who does the most. So I think that'll fade over time. I just think coaches have been scared, and you could educate me on if it's the same way in the fitness realm. But I just think sometimes people are scared at that whole, I can work smart. I can get all my clients or groups or teams or what have you done in an efficient manner. And guess what? I can still go home at night and see my wife and kids or husband and kids and whatever.
I think, I think you bring up a good point there. Is it the same in the fitness? I would agree. I think you're taught to some extent. There's that misconception that they'll say to people, and this is only one company that I've worked with in the past. They say, "Oh, you can work the hours that you want," which is at the beginning is not possible because you can't dictate to a client, "Oh, I am only working these certain hours. This is only the slots I've got," because you can't use that kind of influence straight off the bat. So it's like, well, for me, that was a red flag straight away. You as the tutor of this course can do that because you're established. You've got that base. You've got the following, be it what's the other word I want? Kind of the scope and the referrals to be able to pick and choose the hours that you work. But somebody starting out cannot do that. They can't just, okay, maybe if they're coming from another gym environment, possibly. But when you're starting out, but then kind of when you're saying working long hours, is that better? I think some professionals would probably say yes because they're successful, but like on the flip side of anything, if you're working multiple amount of hours, yes, you're going to burn out. And if you've got a family environment as well as that, you possibly are sacrificing that for your business. So I think with the online platform, I think that does bring a little bit of that, probably the work-life balance into perspective, because yes, then you can work, so to speak, the hours that you want and still have a life outside of that.
Yeah, no question. Yep. No question. I agree wholeheartedly. And you have unique insight there because it seems like from your body of work that's a domain that you're really familiar with. And, I just think that we're in a different, people don't understand 21st century is a bit different, right? Like when you're early on in your career, for sure, burn as much oil as you can. And shoot, even right now, I'm starting a new kind of entity for coaches. I am not getting as much sleep as I'd like, and my training has had to adjust and things like that. But it's this glorification of busy that needs to go away, right? Like I don't ever feel the need to get on and be like, oh my gosh, I'm the busiest guy in the world, right? You still make time for things. Like, I have groups I'm going to coach before and after this podcast, and I have a number of other things I'm going to work on, but I'm still able to squeeze this in because you can prioritize that, right? It would be very easy for me to reach out to you because the amount of podcasts that I've done since the book has come out has been awesome. It's been really great. But I could have easily reached out and just been like, hey, man, too busy. Sorry. Thanks. So, and there are some things I do have to say no to. Yeah, I think that's another good topic to segue into is saying no. That's the biggest thing I struggle with now is because of this highly interconnected age that we live in, if I say no to somebody, even if it's for an altruistic and honest reason, saying, hey, you know what, I'm behind, I got some massive projects coming up, I just can't commit to it now, let's check back in 6 months. You leave that up to that person to just be like, ugh, blowing me off. This person's big time. This person's this, right? We're so emotional. It's, and this will probably be one of the last podcasts I do for the next 3 months because I have those projects. But you learn as you get older, and this, right? Like you seem like a really sharp, intelligent guy that's been through a lot, given your tremendous accomplishments athletically. And not everybody's going to like you, and even if you helped every cat out of a tree, every old woman across the street, and you worked with the homeless day in and day out, there's still going to be a lot of people that just think you're a self-serving whatever. And I've learned to just kind of deal with that, because as long as the people that know you really, really closely and the people that work with you day in and day, who cares what the people on the fringe think? That's life. Somebody made a great comment the other day. They're like, oh man, I love people, but they go, if you ever want to lose faith in the human race, just read YouTube comments. Literally go to anything. And these people just sit there. It's so funny. It's like furry cat 820 will sit there and just dislike everything. Meanwhile, it's some 11-year-old kid in a video game chair sucking down Mountain Dew. You know what I mean? But it's funny. I think that's why psychology and understanding chaos, envy, and all these kinds of things that make us, oddly, what's the word I want to look, cannibalistic and corrosive sometimes is so intriguing to me, because it's like, why go out of your way? There's already like enough crap in the world. Like, why go out of your way to, it doesn't take a lot of intelligence to find negative stuff out there, in my opinion, at least.
But I think you bring up a good point there in terms of when people interpret, say, like you said, for a good reason, it's probably reflecting on the circumstances, because obviously you're saying you're busy over the next 3 to 6 months, but check back with me in 6 months to obviously get it engaged. It's not you saying predominantly, not predominantly, but an outright no. It's this moment in time, it's not ideal for me. Let me reschedule it for a more ideal time. It's probably redefine. It's probably maybe how the person's brought up as well. I've been very much. You got to look at it in the grand scheme of things. The person's not said outright no. I can't do it at all. It's just not right for now. Or right. When you say it, you probably would do your research in terms of, well, does that podcast add value to what I'm doing, and obviously as a more influential person, you've got to obviously do that. It's probably, it comes back to that self-promotion to some extent. It's probably trying to grow the audience, so to speak, and doing it that. So it's picking and choosing when you do things. So obviously you're probably in a good position to do that, and it's probably for the other individual to take that on board and say for them, if there's somebody that's lower down the pecking order, they've got to kind of reflect on that one and say, well, would you do that to somebody else below you?
Yeah. I don't think you're always, you make some valid points. I just think you have to always assess where you're at and what's going to be most beneficial to the long-term goals, right? And so I just try to keep those things in front of me. When your values are clear to you, making decisions becomes easier. And I know I'm in a point right now where, it's very important for me to be more involved in helping more of the coaching community, because I think there's some things that we could do better. And I think we have some really special people in our field. I think a lot of times our issues get swept under the rug. And so things that I do or do not take on at this point in time have to allow me to make the biggest ripple possible And there's different times, there's seasons, right? Sometimes that may be doing more podcasts. Sometimes it may be writing a book. I mean, I hate writing. I never thought, like, I always wanted to write a book before I died, but I hate writing. Just the process of sitting, and you're in the same chair for a long time. And I know a lot of people, including myself, would still say that writing helps clarify your thoughts. But I'm also a little bit more, this sounds really messed up, I'm a little bit, I'll say, socially inclined as opposed to orally inclined, that I find clarity through speaking my thoughts, and I enjoy talking to people. Writing just seems to take quite a bit of time, and it's not something, when I'm sitting, those ideas don't flow as freely. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
When I'm kinetic, those ideas, those emotions, the parallels I'm able to draw between seemingly disparate ideas is a lot easier for me. Comes a lot more easily to me. Writing, I'm like sitting there, I'm like, I don't really like, and then when I do put anything out, I'm just like, this sucks. Which, like, it always intrigues me when some people write, I think they're like, oh yeah, I'm the end all be all. I'm very much the opposite. If I look at like my writing, I'm like, oh, I don't even listen to myself on podcasts, but I think that's natural to a degree. But no, you make some fantastic points there.
But
are you gonna write a book?
People have said to me, why don't you? But it's probably comes back to happens like you said early doors. Does it add value? So it's probably yeah. People say, oh, you should write a book on this. Yeah, but if I can't aid people and they get benefit out of it, what's the point in putting it out there?
Why do you think they wouldn't get benefit out of it? I mean, listen, I understand, just real quick, because like I thought my mom and like 3 friends would maybe read my book, and then it's like I had no idea, especially because we self-publish it, that it would become a bestseller, let alone in 4 months. It ended up hitting like the top 10. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm just saying that because I didn't think what I said was anything special. I hoped it helped, right? But like, essentially you're saying the same thing. Like, if you feel like you have something that could help people, put it out. There's only one way to find out, man. Put skin in the game, and you seem like you have really interesting perspective, and the things you accomplish are not normal. And so I think sometimes just telling some stories and making sure that it's in a relatable, kind of helpful way, I don't think you'll go wrong.
But to kind of come back to my point, I was going to ask you, if you had the chance to maybe, what would it be the word, do it as an audiobook, and you would have thought maybe it's going towards that in the future, that probably books are going to be more and more in that kind of genre. Would it have been easier for you to, well, we use the quote writing because it's not really the writing, but if it was in that kind of realm that you were speaking your thoughts as opposed to writing them down, would that have been easier to have been done?
No, not in that context, because it's not like giving a PowerPoint presentation or even doing a podcast. If I'm going to speak something that would essentially become a book with no written script or format, you'd be in a lot of trouble. You'd be very repetitive. It would probably lack a lot of organization. You'd essentially be coming up with it on the fly because you might have an outline together, but nothing to fill those gaps. It would be hard to tie everything in. So I don't know if anybody would ever be able to verbally do an audiobook, like an Audible thing, without having written a book, or at least a very, very thorough manuscript at the very least. I also do Audible. I think people sometimes drastically underestimate what that takes, and I didn't know either, right? Like, before I did this, even writing a book, I mean, that I'll be very open. That cost me and my family $20,000, more than $20,000 to write a book, because you're paying editors, you're paying a graphic designer for the cover. I wrote it between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. When I wasn't coaching people, obviously, like it's super late at night. And then, to make the decision not to go with a publisher, because a lot of the publishers wanted to make it more kind of leadership oriented, in terms of, not that there's anything wrong with that, but it wasn't going to be as kind of strong wording. It was going to be more kind of sing-songy leadership book, because they want it to be a massive audience so they can get their investment back. And so it was tough, because now I'm like, okay, I have to put all this money in. I'm putting all this time in. Supremely stressful. I probably rewrote the book 4 or 5 times. And keep in mind, I don't even know that I had written more than 2 blog articles in my life because it's just not my passion. And then to have to promote it myself and through word of mouth, like that's tough, right? And then I didn't understand that like Amazon, that's another thing, right? So reviews are critically important. So I always have to ask people to please, please, please leave a review because that affects how Amazon prices things. That affects this and that, or just because people will reach out to me and say, hey, what's your book about? And I don't want to sit here and be like, oh, dude, check out my book. I'd rather have you guys state your. So I would just say, hey, love it or hate it, can you put a review on Amazon, please? Because it keeps the pricing of the book fair because Amazon controls all that. And then 2, it helps other coaches or people learn more about it. So it's a massive undertaking. And then to do Audible, I just found out, probably a few months ago, the microphone that I'm talking through you now, you have to buy a special mic. If you want to do this yourself, special mic, recording equipment, you have to send it in a certain file size. You have to do all these steps. I mean, it's crazy. You have to go back and filter it. You have to have a pop microphone so that you don't hear that, when you're talking. There can't be any ambient noise. So if I'm midway through a chapter and my dog barks, now I have to make some kind of sound and go back and edit it. And then only after you have this perfect file, audio file, can you submit it to Audible, and then you pay for all this other stuff. Or you can basically just say, hey, you guys do it. But then you risk an author that's not familiar with your subject matter material. Not an author, a narrator. You're paying them a significant sum of money and they're already getting that money. So now you're out more money, and you don't write these books I get like $3 if somebody buys it off Amazon, right? Like it's not like people think if you write a book that you're like rich. But my point is a lot of people be like, oh, is it going to be on Audible now? And I'm like, oh, dude, I'd love for it to be on Audible. And I'd like to narrate it because I think it's usually more personal that way, right? But man, you guys don't know what it takes. I'm still trying. I only wrote the book, like it only came out 5 months ago. I'm still trying to recover. It's like, you seem the same way. So correct me if I'm wrong. I don't want to assume. When I'm coaching or around certain friends, I'm very extroverted, right? But when I'm not in those environments, I'm a pretty introverted person. And I find that after I'm, done coaching for the day, or even after I'm done doing a podcast like this, I don't really want to talk that much the rest of the day. I kind of want to just chill and be left alone. So that takes a good bit out of you too. That's how writing a book is. It's like you go to this really loud, obnoxious party and, everybody wants to talk to you, or you've been coaching 12 groups that day. When you go home, you don't really want to hear yourself speak. Like I'm still trying to recover from that book. It was just a lot of emotional and creative energy, I think is what I'm trying to say.
I would definitely agree. I'm probably very much similar to that.
Yeah, it's hard, man. So a lot of times you just want to be like, no, leave me alone, please. I love you guys. I'm really glad, but like I'm not putting out an audiobook in the next 3 months. It's more work than you think. But I'm glad that there's interest in it. I think that would be a fascinating idea that you posed. I just think it would be pretty hard, to lock into an audiobook like that. I think you'd have to have a really thorough manuscript to go off of.
But you probably could go a step further than that in terms of be it coaching, anything scientific, from somebody that's not interested in the subject could obviously switch off because the kind of language that is used even reading at times can be quite boring.
Yep. No question. Really good question, man. You asked some very thoughtful, unique questions. I appreciate that.
Well, that's probably come down to my nature and being, I would say, quite laid back, and that's kind of questions I like to be. It's not, as you say, it's not scripted. I think it comes back to, I think some individuals that are laid back and be able to do it on the fly can kind of think on their feet. Whereas if you've got a structure and I say, well, this is question 1, 2, 3, 4, you say like in that order, and you answer a different way that I'm not expecting to, it kind of can throw somebody off. Whereas I think when you are the opposite, I think you can adjust because, okay, I've got to concentrate and listen to what your answer is to be able to ask a follow-up question, but you're not leading the guest. Sometimes you can, if you are scripting it to some extent, you can refer back to a bullet point that you had, but it's kind of having that ebb and flow. and I kind of adjust it like that, because I think in the past I have had a script, but how I've asked the questions, it's not muddled it up, but those sequences weren't in the same order, but it was still that kind of questioning. But I think it very much comes down to, I think, the guests at times, because some will ask in advance, can you send me questions? Those are at times are quite difficult, because it's like,
no.
No, I've asked you to come on. I've not really thought about any questions at the moment.
Yeah, and you make a good point, right? Like, it's a conversation, right? And conversation is a dance, and it should be natural, and no one's listen to a bunch of scripted jargon at all. I mean, I know I don't. Yeah, I'll get on a plane. I'll be like, all right, I'm ready to listen to something. I'll turn it on, and the first like 30 minutes of the podcast is just like, hello, what is your name? Where are you from? It's like, all right, dude, maybe I'll just, ma'am, can I have some peanuts? I'm going to pass out here for about an hour. So it's like, I can appreciate that.
I think the only question that is generic would be the intro question. I think that's it.
Yeah, but that's necessary, right? I don't know. It's not like I'm Richard Branson. I don't expect people to know who I am, And so, yeah, no question. No, it's been a lot of fun. You asked great questions, and I'm glad we were able to get on here.
So, last question, Brett, before we wrap up the show.
Sure.
If you had to summarize this episode into one sentence for people to take away, what would that be?
The interaction that you and I have had?
Yes.
Okay, let me think about this, because one thing I've been working on is giving a little bit more delayed responses. In my family, we're very much a catchphrase family. It's a bunch of smartasses that always have to come back with something, right? And so there's a time when that is not necessary, and this is one of those times. I would say, and I'm not going to say anything trite, because the easy one would be like, oh, enlightening. I think this is a really enlightening, I think that this is just one that is, there's broad strokes here for sure, because I think we covered a lot of unique aspects. It hasn't just been like, this monomania about one subject. So broad strokes, you could use that. You could use free flow. I just say diverse. I think we've covered some diverse topics here. We're not talking about the 5 ways to do a squat. And I think that that's necessary. I think thoughtful, like crucial conversations about a variety of subjects that challenge us and make us think a bit more deeply is needed. So I would say just diverse.
So Brett, once again, thanks for coming on the Mindset Game podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, James.